"Well done, Tyler," I muttered, pushing the words through a grin that felt like shattered stone. I'm Anthony, 44 years old, and I just witnessed 5 years of my career handed to a 23-year-old who'd been at Ravenswood Enterprises for a mere 3 months. Tyler beamed as if he'd achieved something grand. The meeting room reeked of old coffee and dashed hopes. Everyone applauded. I joined in. My boss, Gerald Patterson, stood at the table's head, chest swollen like a proud bird. "Tyler's going to excel as our new regional operations director," he declared. The very role I'd been preparing for since 2019, the one I'd been assured would be mine when old Henderson stepped down. I kept my hands clasped, my expression blank. But a chill settled in my core where ambition once thrived. Tyler was Gerald's nephew, everyone knew it. No one mentioned it. The kid's business degree was barely dry, and he carried a confidence born of never having to prove himself. For 3 months, he'd shadowed me as I managed vendor agreements, oversaw supply chain operations, and resolved equipment issues across 4 states. Now he was my supervisor. "Anthony's been crucial in getting Tyler ready," Gerald added, as if that softened the blow. As if 5 years of flawless evaluations and 60-hour weeks were just preparation for someone else's ascent. I nodded, glad to contribute, I said. The meeting wrapped up. Colleagues shuffled out, shaking Tyler's hand and offering praise. I collected my notebook and pen, moving deliberately. My thoughts were sharp, like waking at midnight with sudden clarity about a nagging problem. Gerald grabbed my arm as I neared the door. "Anthony, stay a moment." We stood alone in the room. He tugged at his tie, attempting a look of empathy. "I know this might be unexpected," he said, "but Tyler offers fresh ideas, new vigor." "Sure," I replied. "You get it, don't you? It's not personal." I held his gaze for a long beat. Gerald, 52, soft around the waist, combed thinning hair over his scalp to mask the bare patches. He'd inherited his role from his father-in-law. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I understand completely," I said. He eased up. "Good. I knew you'd handle this like a professional. That's why you're such an asset to the team." Asset. Not valuable enough for the promotion I'd earned, but enough to train his nephew and act grateful. I returned to my desk and sat. The office hummed with routine noise. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, people tackling issues. I opened my laptop, stared at the screen for a full minute, then began typing. I'd joined Ravenswood Enterprises in March 2019, right after my divorce was finalized. I needed a fresh start, and logistics in manufacturing felt like a solid foundation. The company distributed industrial equipment across the Southwest, dull work, but it paid well and let me rest easy. Gerald hired me personally, shook my hand, said they needed my expertise. I'd spent 12 years at my last job before layoffs cut me loose. At 44, rebuilding wasn't simple, but Gerald painted it as a chance. "We're expanding quickly," he'd said during my interview. "Plenty of room to climb for the right person." I became that person. Worked weekends when deliveries stalled, stayed late for client emergencies, forged ties with suppliers from Phoenix to Houston. My reviews were impeccable. Gerald always smiled, always hinted at bigger roles. "Your leadership material, Anthony," he'd say, "just stay patient, patient." I excelled at patience. My daughter, Sophia, visited every other weekend. She was 16 now, old enough to notice my exhaustion. Sometimes she'd catch me at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, laptop open, answering work emails. "Dad, it's Sunday," she'd say. "Just getting ahead," I'd reply. "Building something solid here." She'd roll her eyes, but she got it. Her mom had remarried a lawyer with normal hours who coached youth baseball. I was the dad who worked too much but paid for her birthday on time and never missed her school plays. The first sign of trouble came 6 months ago when Gerald mentioned his nephew might join the company. "Bright kid," he'd said. "Just graduated from the University of Texas. Business degree." I nodded, unconcerned. Companies often hired new graduates, starting them at the bottom to learn the ropes. But Tyler didn't start at the bottom. He got an office next to Gerald's, titled Operations Specialist, with a salary I could only imagine. Gerald paraded him around like a visiting dignitary. "Tyler's here to study our systems," Gerald announced. "To learn how we operate." Tyler studied by sitting in on my client calls, jotting notes as I explained vendor negotiations, asking questions that revealed he didn't grasp the basics. But he was enthusiastic, I'll admit, and courteous. Said yes, sir, and thank you like he'd been raised well. "I trained him because that's what you do. You guide the rookie. Even when the rookie's last name is Patterson, and his uncle signs your checks. Even when you start suspecting where it's all leading." The truth hit 3 weeks ago, in a conversation I wasn't meant to overhear. I'd stayed late to finish quarterly reports. The office was quiet except for the cleaning staff. I was heading to the break room for coffee when I heard voices from Gerald's office. His door was slightly ajar, and the hallway echoed more than people realized. The board will raise concerns, Gerald was saying. Tyler's only been here 2 months. Another voice, deeper, older, likely James Mitchell from corporate. You said Anthony was ready for the role. Anthony's dependable, but Tyler's family, and he's got the degree. The board values credentials. What about Anthony's experience? Gerald chuckled, not cruelly but not kindly either. Anthony's a solid worker, steady. But he's not leadership material. He'll keep doing his job, earn good money, and it'll all work out. I stood in that hallway for 30 seconds, hearing them map out my future. Tyler would take Henderson's role. I'd train him, support him, and act thankful for the chance. Anthony won't make waves, Gerald went on. He's got a daughter. Alimony to pay, he needs this job. He'll stay in line, that's when I left. Quietly, so my footsteps wouldn't echo. I returned to my desk, saved my work, and left the building. Drove home in silence. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Gerald's words echoed. He'll stay in line like I was a dog trained to heel. Like 5 years of loyalty and effort earned me the privilege of accepting less. I thought of Sophia. How proud she'd been when I told her about the potential promotion. My dad's going to be a director, she'd bragged to her friends. Now I'd have to tell her it wasn't happening. I thought of my ex-wife. How she'd always said I was too accommodating. You let people trample you, Anthony, she'd said during one of our final arguments. Stand up for yourself for once. Maybe she was right. The next morning, I returned to work with a new perspective. I observed Tyler closely. Noticed how Gerald included him in high-level meetings while keeping me buried in daily operations. Saw how other managers began deferring to Tyler on decisions that should have been mine. 3 weeks later, sitting in that meeting room, watching Tyler accept praise for a job he hadn't earned, something snapped inside me. Not anger or sorrow, just certainty. Gerald thought I needed this job, thought I'd stay in line because of bills and a daughter to support. He was wrong about a lot. I opened my laptop and began drafting my resignation letter. My hands were calm, my mind clear. For the first time, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I submitted my resignation at precisely 4:30 p.m. that Friday. Gerald had just returned from touring Tyler around the warehouse, showing off his new territory. I knocked on his door, handed him the envelope, and said, "This is my 2 weeks' notice." Gerald's face cycled through emotions, confusion, disbelief, then a flicker of panic. He ripped open the envelope and scanned the letter quickly. "Is this a prank?" he asked. "No, sir, you're serious. You're quitting because Tyler got the promotion." I stayed silent, letting him stew. Gerald stood, pacing behind his desk. "Anthony, let's be sensible. You're upset, I understand. But throwing away 5 years of your career, that's not wise. I've made my choice. What about your daughter? Your obligations." There it was, the leverage he thought he had. The reason I'd stay quiet and comply. "I'll manage," I said. Gerald's tone sharpened. "You know how this looks, right? Quitting because you didn't get the job, it's immature, unprofessional." I nodded. "I can see why you'd think that. I won't give you a good reference, you get that. Walking out like this, leaving us in the lurch. No company wants someone who throws fits. A cold knot formed in my gut. 5 years of perfect performance, now labeled a fit. 5 years of late nights and weekends, now deemed unprofessional. That's your call," I said. Gerald sat, trying a new tactic. "Look, Anthony, I respect you. You're skilled, but Tyler brings something unique. Youth, new ideas, vision." Vision, I echoed. The board wants innovation, forward-thinking. Tyler's the future of this company. And what am I? Gerald hesitated. Experience, reliability. Those matter too, valuable enough to train his successor, but not to promote. I understood the equation. "Thanks for clarifying," I said. "Don't do this, Anthony. Take the weekend, reconsider. Come back Monday and we'll act like this never happened." I looked at Gerald for a long moment. He truly believed I'd back down. Believed threatening my reference and questioning my professionalism would make me cave. "I'll complete my 2 weeks," I said. "Train Tyler on what he needs." Gerald's expression darkened. "You'll train him. You think Tyler needs training from someone who quits when things don't go their way? He'll need to understand vendor contracts, supply chain logistics, emergency protocols." I kept my tone even. "Unless you plan to handle those yourself," that struck a nerve. Gerald knew he didn't grasp the technical side of operations. Neither did Tyler. They needed me at least for 2 more weeks. "Fine," Gerald said, 2 weeks. "But don't expect any favors. Don't expect help landing another job. You're torching bridges, Anthony." I nodded and turned to leave. "Anthony," Gerald called, "you're making a huge mistake." I paused at the door, perhaps. But it's my mistake to make. I walked to my desk, feeling lighter than I had in months. The office was nearly empty, people heading home for the weekend. Tyler was still at his desk, poring over organizational charts like they held life secrets. I sat, opened my laptop, and began documenting everything Tyler would need. Vendor contacts, emergency procedures, troubleshooting guides. Not because Gerald asked, but because the people relying on our supply chains deserved better than disorder. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "Dad, can we grab dinner tomorrow? Want to hear about your week?" I smiled and replied, "Definitely. Got news to share." Good news for once, news about standing up for myself. About walking away from people who didn't value my contributions. Gerald thought he was punishing me. Thought threatening my reference would make me cling to my job. He had no clue what he'd set in motion. Monday morning brought clarity. I arrived early as always and found Tyler already at his desk, looking swamped. He had spreadsheets on 3 monitors and was scribbling notes from vendor emails. "Morning, Tyler," I said. "How's the transition?" He looked up, relief washing over him. "Anthony, thank goodness. I've been here since 6 trying to sort out the Morrison Industries account. Their procurement manager's threatening to pull our contract if we don't fix a shipping issue by noon. Morrison Industries, our largest client, they ordered $2 million in heavy machinery components yearly. I'd managed their account for 4 years. What's the problem? I asked. Something about delayed titanium brackets from our Tucson supplier. But I can't figure out which supplier, and their emails are a mess. I glanced at Tyler's screen. He had Morrison's email open, but also unrelated supplier contracts. He was syncing. "Tyler," I said cautiously, "did Gerald brief you on the Morrison account? He said you'd handle the handover, but then he mentioned your situation, and I thought I should figure it out myself. Show initiative. My situation. That's what they called it now." I spent 3 hours guiding Tyler through the Morrison account, explained their just-in-time delivery needs, showed him the backup supplier network I'd built over 4 years, clarified why a small shipping delay could spiral into a contract loss. "This is insanely complex," Tyler said as we resolved the issue. "How do you manage all these details?" "Experience," I said, "and solid documentation." "Can you show me your documentation system?" That's when it hit me. Gerald hadn't just promoted Tyler unprepared. He'd promoted him without grasping what the job demanded. Tyler wasn't incapable, but he was utterly unready for the scope of regional operations. I spent my lunch break making calls, reached out to contacts I'd built over the years. Word spreads fast in industrial logistics, and people were already hearing about shifts at Ravenswood. Some worried about continuity. Others were curious about opportunities. "Anthony," said Janet Morrison, the procurement manager who'd threatened to cancel that morning. "I heard whispers about management changes. Tell me you're still managing our account." "For the next 2 weeks," I said. "After that, Tyler Patterson will be your main contact." Silence. "Patterson as in Gerald Patterson, his nephew." "Good Lord, Anthony, that kid called me this morning asking nonsense questions. I thought he was a newbie not replacing you. He's eager to learn. I don't have time to train Ravenswood's management. We've got production deadlines. If your company can't deliver competent service, we'll find someone who can." That conversation repeated 4 times with 4 major clients. By day's end, I saw what would happen after I left. Tyler would flounder. Clients would grow frustrated. Gerald would panic and try to control operations he didn't understand. The regional division would lose clients within 6 months. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Tuesday morning, Gerald summoned me to his office. He looked weary, stressed. "Anthony, I've been reflecting on our Friday talk. Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe there's room for both you and Tyler in leadership. Meaning, associate director, Tyler as second in command. You'd handle the technical side. He'd focus on strategy, associate director. A fabricated title that meant doing the same job for the same pay while pretending Tyler was my boss." "That's kind," I said, "but I'm sticking with my decision." Gerald's face tightened. "You'll regret this, Anthony, I guarantee it." "Maybe." But I was done fearing Gerald's guarantees. By Wednesday, I had 3 job interviews lined up and a plan beyond just leaving Ravenswood. I'd spent 5 years building connections in the Southwest industrial supply chain. Those connections were mine, not the company's. My first interview was Thursday morning with Silverline Energy, a renewable energy equipment distributor in Austin. Their regional manager, David Harrison, had been trying to recruit me for 2 years. Wait, I caught my mental slip. David Harrison, not that other name. That name was off limits. David Harrison had been eyeing me. Anthony, David said as we shook hands in his office. Words out you might be free, news travels fast. It does when talent like you becomes available, especially with your client connections. David offered me the role of Regional Operations Director, the same title Gerald gave Tyler. The salary was 30% higher than at Ravenswood. Better benefits. Most importantly, they wanted my client network. We're pushing into the heavy machinery component market, David explained. Your ties with Morrison Industries, Copperfield Manufacturing, and Border States Equipment would be a game changer. It was ethical, standard in the industry. Clients followed trusted account managers, especially in a relationship-driven field like industrial supply. I hadn't signed a non-compete, and my clients could choose their suppliers. I'd need to give Ravenswood 2 weeks' notice, I said. Of course, professional courtesy, though I suspect they'll let you go early once they realize what's happening. David was right. Friday afternoon, Gerald called me in again. Tyler sat in the corner, looking defeated. Apparently, news of my Thursday interview had reached them. I hear you're talking to competitors, Gerald said. I'm exploring new possibilities. While you're still employed here, training Tyler, that's a conflict of interest. I stayed silent. It's also corporate theft, Gerald pressed, sharing confidential information with rivals. I haven't shared anything confidential. Your client connections are company property. My client connections are personal. I built them through 5 years of dedicated work. Gerald's face flushed. Those clients belong to Ravenswood Enterprises. Try to take them and we'll sue you for everything you've got. Tyler spoke from the corner. Uncle Gerald, maybe we should? Quiet, Tyler. Gerald's eyes stayed locked on me. Anthony, if you walk out and try to poach our clients, I'll ensure you never work in this industry again. I stood slowly. Gerald, I've given you 5 years of my life. Flawless performance reviews, 60-hour weeks. I trained your nephew for the role you promised me. I've been nothing but professional. And now I'm completing my 2 weeks' notice and moving to a better opportunity. What happens next depends on how you manage the transition. Gerald leaned back. We'll see about that. I turned to the door, then looked back. Tyler, if you need assistance over the next week, just ask. Despite what your uncle believes, I want you to do well. Tyler nodded, appreciative. Gerald scowled. I spent my final week at Ravenswood documenting everything Tyler needed to know. Not because Gerald earned it, but because Tyler, at 23, was thrust into a role beyond his control. On my last day, I cleared my desk, said farewells to colleagues, and handed Gerald my badge. This isn't finished, Gerald said. For me, it is, I replied. I left Ravenswood Enterprises feeling lighter than I had in years. The consequences came 6 months later, but not as I'd anticipated. I was settling into my role at Silverline Energy when David Harrison called me into his office, a grin on his face. Anthony, you've got to see this, he said, sliding a trade magazine across his desk. The headline read, Ravenswood Enterprises Southwest Division loses major clients, nepotism blamed asterisk. The article described how Ravenswood lost 4 key accounts in 5 months, including Morrison Industries and Copperfield Manufacturing. Southwest revenue had plummeted 60%. The board had launched a probe into management practices. Gerald Patterson was fired last week, David said. The board found Tyler Patterson was hired without proper qualifications. They're calling it a nepotism scandal. I read on. Tyler had stepped down after 3 months of struggling with accounts he couldn't handle. He'd returned to graduate school, per the article. Gerald faced a lawsuit from Morrison Industries for breach of contract after a supply chain failure caused a $2 million production delay. Here's the kicker, David added. 3 of their remaining clients contacted us, specifically asking if you're available to manage their accounts. The article noted that several former Ravenswood employees had joined competitors, taking their expertise with them. No names were mentioned, but I recognized the trend. When talented people leave, others take notice. What goes around comes around, David said. Gerald Patterson took you for granted for 5 years. Now he's jobless and you're growing our Southwest division. I folded the magazine and handed it back. I feel for Tyler, I said. The kid was thrown into a role he wasn't ready for. Tyler will be okay. He's young, he'll grow from this. Gerald, though, David shrugged. Hard to pity someone who discarded talent to promote family. A year later, I was driving through Tucson on business and stopped at a diner near the airport. Tyler Patterson sat alone in a booth studying a textbook. He looked up as I approached. Anthony, what brings you here? Business trip. Mind if I join you? He motioned to the seat across from him. Tyler looked more mature, focused. The textbook was Industrial Supply Chain Dynamics. Back in school, I asked. Master's program at Arizona State, supply chain specialization. He gave a wry smile. Figured I should actually learn the job I was supposed to do. Smart move. I wanted to thank you, Tyler said, for how you handled everything. You could have left me to fail, but you didn't. You tried to help me succeed. You were in an unfair spot. Uncle Gerald still blames you for everything. Says you wrecked the company. I sipped my coffee. What do you think? Tyler closed his book. I think I was 23 with a business degree and no real experience. I think Uncle Gerald gave me a job I wasn't ready for because I was family. And I think you deserved the promotion you earned over 5 years. We sat in easy silence for a moment. I'm sorry for how it all happened, Tyler said. You deserved better. We both did, I replied. But sometimes things work out as they're meant to. Tyler nodded. I heard you're thriving at Silverline. I am, and you'll do well too when you're ready. I paid for our lunches and shook Tyler's hand before leaving. He was a decent kid caught in his uncle's game. 6 months later, Gerald Patterson filed for bankruptcy after losing a wrongful termination lawsuit against Ravenswood's board. Tyler graduated with honors and took an entry-level job at a logistics firm in Phoenix, spending 2 years learning the industry from the ground up before earning his first promotion. The nephew had grasped what the uncle never did. Respect and advancement are earned, not inherited. Sometimes the best revenge is walking away and building something greater.